we here?
Yes, we're back.
We're back, and someone's confirmed that they can see us.
Good.
Out there in the world, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So what were we saying?
So, for the sake of this new stream, I am going to reintroduce everything. My name is Natalie Nedvetsky. We're so sorry for the technical issues. Technology is not the greatest friend often, but poetry and music are. So, welcome to Literary Music Series. My name is Natalie Nedvetsky. This is Joseph Fasano. He is a poet, novelist, and my Columbia professor. And today we will be exploring the theme of childhood through poetry, specifically by Fasano himself, and music by Brahms, his Ballade in D minor, and Schumann, Kinderszenen, Traumerei, from that piano set, which means dreams. And I will hand it once again over to Joseph to discuss the first poem that he will be reading.
Okay. So I'm imagining that people are hearing us, and here we are. The first poem that I'm going to read is a poem called Mahler in New York. And I think the main thing to say is that it does end with a kind of meditation on childhood, in the sense that childhood is very often something in our lives that we must go back to fetch something that we left there, that we forgot to think about, that we forgot to feel, that we forgot to concern ourselves with. And so Rilke, I was just saying that Rilke writes really about childhood in almost everything that he writes about. But he has this beautiful line at the end of one of his poems in which he thinks about coming to the end of childhood and being astonished at having to go on. In other words, there are new rules, new laws, new forms. And maybe tonight, if we have a moment, we'll discuss form and what that means for us. So I'll just read the poem. Mahler in New York. Now when I go out, the wind pulls me into the grave. I go out to part the hair of a child I left behind, and he pushes his face into my cuffs to smell the wind. If I carried my father with me, it is the way a horse carries autumn in its mane. If I remember my brother, it is as if a buck had knelt down in a room I was in. I kneel, and the wind kneels down in me. What is it to have a history, a flock buried in the blindness of winter? Try crawling with two violins into the hallway of your father's hearse. It is filled with sparrows. Sometimes I go to the field, and the field is bare. There is the wind, which entrusts me. There is a woman walking with a pail of milk, a man who tilts his bread in the sun. There is the black heart of a mare in the milk. Or is it the wind, the way it goes? I don't know about the wind, about the way it goes. All I know is that sometimes someone will pick up the black violin of his childhood and start playing. That it sits there on his shoulder like a thin gray falcon asleep in its blinders, and that we carry each other this way because it is the way we would like to be carried, sometimes with mercy, sometimes without.
That was beautiful. And
Thank
that
you.
was so fitting. In that same vein, I will discuss a little bit about Traumerei, Brahms' Dream by Robert Schumann. And after I play, we'll have a discussion about why we think these works connect to each other, why we think they connect to childhood. But one thing I do want to say is it carries this same sense of deep longing for something in the past that stays with you, but that you can't necessarily touch. And Schumann wrote this in 1838. He was in a period of separation from his then fiancée Clara, and they weren't separated romantically, they were just separated by distance. And she told him, she said, "You're such a child sometimes, why don't you write a piece that fits you?" And that's such an almost ironic statement, because Schumann really dealt with a lot of mental struggles throughout his life. He dealt with, I think, what would now be diagnosed as bipolar. He had a difficult time performing piano, so he left that to his wife, and he spent his years composing. And this in particular is, I think, one of his most golden compositions. And Traumerei, which is part of a larger set, part of Kinderszenen, or Scenes from Childhood, it's in the middle of the set, and what comes before it are literally scenes from childhood. You know, a child playing in the forest, a child playing with their siblings. And then what comes after it is, you know, the same very kind of pastoral childlike scenes. But this, which kind of breaks the set in two, is almost a departure from reality. It is quite literally a dream. And as you'll hear when I play it in a few moments, there is a phrase that comes back every time. And it comes back in different iterations and in different harmonizations. And that phrase, to me, its leaping upwards, its differentiation, signifies someone trying to reach for something and never quite being able to catch it or attain it, but always reaching for it. And so let me know if you hear it.
That's so beautiful.
Thank you.
And I know what you mean about the impossible longing in it. Do you know those Rilke lines, Die Erde ist wie ein Kind, das Gedichte weiß? Do you know what that means? It's the earth is like a child who knows poems by heart. It's a beautiful poem in which he's thinking about the return of spring, and he thinks of the earth as this child who has labored in the darkness of winter. Winter was her schoolmaster, and a stern master, but out of all those lessons, she can now sing these poems. And it just brought that to mind. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, and that makes me think again about Schumann himself as a man. And often many of us, when we enter adulthood and say goodbye to our childhood, we have to face harsher realities. And we would like to hope that this childlike wonder lives inside of us forever. And I think it does. And I think often perhaps we see it in different forms, like you were talking about forms. Perhaps we see it in unexpected ways, but there's a line in your poem, like your father lives in the main, they're in the wind,
But yeah,
someone
if I
that you
carry
know.
my father with me, it is
Yes.
the way a horse carries autumn in its mane, right?
And I really feel that both the poem and this music speak to carrying something from the past with us, carrying your childlike self with you forever. And it's almost like nature in my perspective. You are able to look at nature, enjoy it, have it influence you, have it shape you. But you can never change it. And so when we look back at our childhood selves, they are people too that stay with us, that teach us lessons, that live inside of us till our dying breath. And we can speak to them, but they don't hear us. That's not their purpose. Their purpose is to live inside of us and help us grow into, the people that we're meant to be, while still retaining that sense of curiosity and wonder.
W.S. Merwin has a great poem, early-ish in his career, and it's sort of a longish poem for Merwin, a little bit desultory, and I'm going to misquote the lines slightly, but I'm sure, but it ends with the idea that here he is, the child who will lead you. So he goes, and I think you're right about finding, it's a very brilliant and interesting idea that the child in us can't hear. I don't know how much that's the case, but yes, we are speaking in terms of this otherness. We are both it and integrated with it, and also separate from it in a way, which I think is part of the longing in that piece.
Yeah, and I think the constant return of this upwards phrase that you hear throughout the music is that very same trying to attain our childlike selves, trying to touch them, to feel them, and perhaps every time that we approach them, just like every time it's harmonized differently, we approach them differently as we age, or depending on where we are in life. I mean, there's posts on social media and places that talk about reparenting yourself, that talk about when you grow up, be the parent to your former self that they needed at that time, and appreciate them and love them. And I think that's one way that we really communicate with our childlike selves. We give them love that they perhaps didn't think that they deserved at the time, but they really do, because they are the shapers of our lives. And I really felt that in your poem, Mahler in New York, there is this sensation of almost having your childlike self infused within you just forever.
Yeah, and I love what you're talking about when you say carry. You know, it's very funny that you say that, because you and I hadn't really spoken about this, but that verb, perhaps I haven't yet exorcised it from my work. There are certain obsessions that come back again and again in the writer's body of work, but that verb has meant a tremendous deal to me throughout my writing career. The things that we carry that we want to set down, the things that we carry that we don't know we're carrying, the things that we are lucky to be carried, the joys that we carry, the joyous burdens that we carry, you know, that we would be lost without. You know, and that kind of weight of things, of carrying certain things, and the good weight of being, you know, that's in poetry too.
Yeah, that's everywhere. Yeah.
Well, shall I read this other poem?
Yes, please.
All right. So this is a poem that's a little bit out of season for us now, but not really, in the sense that I suppose it deals with the kind of, it's called October. It's from my first book, which is called Fugue for Other Hands. Already in that title is, I suppose I was thinking at the time about many things, but certainly the idea that we sort of hand our lives over in a lot of ways to another, or to some other in us, and who is it that plays us? Who is it that plays the music that we are? Very often it's ghosts in us that are playing the music. We are instruments for the mysteries. You know, poetry, I can say, is this tightrope one walks in never quite knowing exactly when to exercise agency and when to be very passive. T.S. Eliot says that bad poets are conscious when they should be unconscious, and unconscious when they should be conscious. And that always terrifies poets. Oh, am I doing it wrong? But I think it's also in the sense of passive when you should be passive, and you're active when you should be active, allowing things to happen and to unfold. So I think this poem, strange as it is, and it is strange because it's a poem about a boy who, perhaps not so strange for a certain kind of country living, who at the beginning of every certain season has to slaughter lambs. Now, lambs, of course, are heavy with a certain symbology. I don't write poems that have symbols in them. As Hemingway said once, you know, if I put a line in my work, I mean a lion. He does not mean to disparage the analysis of that line, only that life is mysterious enough, and the images in a poem should not map onto some concept that pre-exists the poem. But I'll read this poem because I will just say one thing more in advance, which is that I think that every life, if I can say a thing so big and perhaps reductive, every life has one thing that it has to let go of to become itself. And it's very hard to figure out what that is. Another poem of mine called Hermitage, I thought about letting go of a certain great lie of your life. But I think this poem has to do with a similar idea. October. This is the season in which the lambs begin to die, in which the boy in his red and blue plaid shirt gets down on his wrists and his knees to crawl into the moorland at night and spread a cross of pumice on their foreheads, in which he reads to them a hymn like a freighter burning with a cargo of ripened fruit, because in the morning he will have to kill them. Because in the morning he will wake to find his father standing in the hall like a horse with a lamp in its mouth. And he will have to wade into a river with only that silence in his arms, and he will harm them. Because every year I watch him stand at the threshold of a season and begin to call them, to hold the ruined bodies of the dead with only a dim cord of flame between his lips, and to touch them and to be with them, to touch them and to sing with them, the way a child touches everything with the hand of his murderer.
Wow. Yeah.
I think you have to be a very young man to write that poem, but I'll leave it at that. I don't disown it. I couldn't get there now, maybe.
Yeah, that's the thing about composing. I think poetry or music is that you only. I think you told me this actually in class.
Yes, I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, that you only have a chance to write a poem when you're 20 once, or when you're 40 once, because the experience is so singular to that experience in your life.
I think that's so right, and that it's exactly what I said to you and to the others in the group this semester, is that you have a particular kind of mystery that's alive in you at one moment in your life, and the best that we can try to do is to have the craft in our hands, in our bodies, so that we can get those poems right. I'm not saying I did in that particular piece or anything. One never does, but you'll write different poems 20 years later. And it's to try to have that craft there, not separate from the work, so that when that mystery is there, its form is also there. I do believe that.
That was a very arresting poem emotionally.
Thank you.
And I think that after reading that poem, I knew exactly what piece I wanted to pair with it, because I think it speaks to that same arresting quality. And as we said before when we were talking, poetry, in my opinion, is the initial expression, and then music is a degree beyond that, because poetry has the words. Music has the same level of feeling, just without the words, and both present beautiful challenges and beautiful triumphs. And so I'll talk a little bit about this Brahms piece. It is one of his first works for piano, which I didn't plan this way, but last week I played one of his last works for piano. So I guess it fits the theme of last week it was endings, and this week it's childhood. And last week it was Opus 119, this week it's Opus 10. So this is one of his ballades, and ballad is a literary form that we actually worked on in class together, and it inspired many classical composers at the time, and still now. And if some of the audience know some of the Chopin ballades, those are the most famously known ballades. And this ballade in particular, how it differs from those is it speaks more to the narrative element of a ballad. It stays very true to the poetic scheme of a ballad. There is very structured form, like a ballad has, and it fits, it truly fits the poetic nature. And this one is special because it's based on a ballad, a Scottish one called Edward. And there's no one version of it, there's a few versions of it because it's almost like folklore.
Yeah, like many folk traditions are like that.
Right, exactly. And the ballad itself is a little bit dark, and it's going to be a contrast from the poetry that was read before these, and before October, and the music that was played before it. It speaks to a little boy. He is returning to his house, and his hands are covered in blood. And his mom asks, "Why are you covered in blood? What did you do?" And he says, "I killed a pig." And she says, no, the pigs are outside. He says, "Okay, I killed a cow." She says, no, the cows are outside. And then he says, "I killed my father. I don't know what to do. What do I do? And the opening of the ballad has this somber, sort of funeral-like sensation to it. And the middle, which is vastly different, enters this realm of perhaps a memory, perhaps something more appropriate for a child to feel. And then yet again, it returns in that structured ballad form to a truly deeply painful reiteration of the initial theme. And we'll discuss later why we think, both the poem and the piece really relate to childhood in a very complex and often dark way, which, childhood isn't always joyous and happy. There are difficult elements to it, and I hope you feel something from this piece. I was gonna say I hope you enjoy, but music like this, I don't think.
No, I like that, Natalie. I hope you feel something.
I don't think you should say I hope you enjoy, because it's not like, it's very. Anyways.
That's very beautiful. I have a question for you that I think the listeners might be interested in as well. You know, because you talked about the structure of the ballad even as very narrative. When you play that piece, do you call a narrative to mind, fragments of a narrative, images, or no?
Well, actually, it's funny that you asked this. When I was growing up, and I still do this very often, when I would learn a piece, I would actually write out a whole story.
Really?
Yeah, I would start in the beginning, and I would, invent a story. I would basically write almost like lyrics to a piece.
Right.
Each part would have a dramatic event that's happening, and I found that that doesn't work with all music that I study. Often, for example, in impressionism, if I play something like Ravel or Debussy, I conjure up images more than stories. But this ballad in particular, yes, I've actually I follow kind of the story that's sort of been given to me by Edward, which is it's a dark story. And for example, in the beginning, I hear this because the rhythm is so steady. I hear him kind of walking.
Like a foreboding, yes.
Yeah,
right.
I hear a foreboding, and I hear him walking into the cabin, kind of with his hands on blood on his hands.
Oh, right. Wow.
And then here in this section, his mom is asking him what he did.
Yeah, the question. That is so true. It sounds like a question, yes.
Yeah, it sounds like a question. And then, the theme returns, and again, he's standing there, and he doesn't know what to say. And when it enters somewhat of the major key sections, like that section in particular, I feel like that's the one place that I truly feel is a retention of his purity and innocence as a child.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you continue into this middle section that is, it starts soft, but it's this very dramatic, intensifying, climactic build-up to these very loud chords. And you would think that he's running in the fields and everything, but I think for me, when I was learning this piece, the story that I conjured up is a boy who is so desperate to retain aspects of his childhood that he lost forever because of this event. He's so desperate to be a child, almost aggressively so, and that's why in these big chords in the major key, I hear, even though it's in the major key, I hear a desperation. And then it dramatically returns to the theme in fortissimo, where it's kind of, he's come to the realization that, yes, I'm not a child anymore. And then this is actually an image that I won't credit to myself. This is an image that my professor gave to me. At the very end, when the theme comes back, the left hand these notes is like blood dripping.
Oh, wow.
That's
that's incredible. But also, as you're playing, it's like and I can feel that you had this sense of narrative in there. Also, I can't help, when you tell us the story, up here, some of the darkness that comes out is his own voice in response to some of this, which is to say the voice of a child who has done such an act has lost its innocence in a very big way. And however much it might be flailing to explain itself, the voice that comes out is going to be another voice. And I hear that in there as well. It's really something. Yeah, I wanted to pick your brain about that because I think that's very interesting to think about. I wanted to know, what's going on in there.
Yeah, and no, I think both the poetry and the music, I feel like speak to aspects of both, like you said really beautifully, having to let something go to become your truest self. But also, I believe that those really painful moments that happen in many childhoods, they we might want to let them go in our memory, but they're never going to escape us. Like we talked about earlier, carrying something. There's positive connotations and there's negative connotations to that.
Well, letting something go or being ready to let it go.
Right.
At one time, somebody was talking to me about that poem, October, of mine, and said it reminded him of the Abraham and Isaac myth, which I had in my mind. This idea, Kierkegaard is obsessed with that moment when Abraham is willing to sacrifice his own son, and Kierkegaard is obsessed with the idea that this is a purely irrational act. It is purely based on faith. Now, of course, he doesn't do it ultimately. He's sort of saved from having to do that, but he was fully prepared to do it. And I think something in there is to do with the different forces in us. I mean, whether or not we let them go or they stay, there's something about a resignation of being willing to let go of something. These are all abstractions, and I, for one, think poems are the spaces in which to ask these questions, and then they connect to people in this ineffable way. But it's fascinating to hear you. It's just beautiful to hear you play, and then it's fascinating to think about these things. And
likewise, I mean, this what you were talking about, being ready to let something go. That's probably the hardest thing that we'll ever come across is, being prepared to let a giant part of yourself go for the sake of growth, I think. Right.
And you never really do, in a good way, in the sense that I think, like Carl says, the life of the work is to integrate the various aspects of the self. Yeah. So certain things, you receive certain things. There are all these deep paradoxes in the human psyche. You receive things by letting them go.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about Schumann and his relationship to Clara, and then maybe I'll share a new piece for people.
I would love that. So,
tell us a little bit about their relationship.
This is exciting. Well, actually, Brahms is also involved in that relationship. It's one of the most famous romantic era love triangles ever known. So, so my friends might get mad and correct me on a couple of these details because anyways, Robert Schumann was working for Clara Wieck's father, who didn't really approve of them because Robert Schumann, I think, was, again, I'm probably wrong, he was much older, but I think he was 18 or 19 or even 20 when she was 12. And he, taught her piano lessons, was like her piano tutor and everything. And eventually they fell in love, and there was some sort of legal battle, I think, that occurred. And eventually her father gave in, and they, eloped, they got married. And Clara herself was one of the most prolific concert pianists ever, actually, which was both really wonderful for Schumann because a lot of the music that he wrote was for her, but also I can only imagine that it hurt him in some way because he, at one point in his life, he kind of experimented with doing something with his hands so he could play better, and he injured himself forever, thus being unable to play. And
but you know what, as you're saying it, because there was something beautiful you said before about something in us that's always there but we can't quite touch.
Yeah.
And that image came to my mind as you're speaking, in the sense that Clara is this sort of, she's another person, and she is that, but she's also, in virtue of the fact that he's making this music that he cannot express with his body, she becomes this other thing that is also an extension of himself that he cannot touch in a way, And so that's something I've always found in their relationship to be incredibly powerful, that longing, that distance, and it's precisely what draws them together.
That's beautiful. I never thought about it that way, but that is so true. Yeah, he wrote for her, and she was an extension of him. She was like the limbs on his fingers when he couldn't play. She was part of him. And
in a way, that's what we are for our own selves too.
Yeah, exactly. That's who we are for perhaps perhaps to conjure the theme to the silent child inside of us who perhaps don't really have a chance to have any say in anything. So we're giving them a chance. But so yes, they were very much in love, and Brahms actually entered the picture around the time that that his piece that he wrote, the Ballade. That was actually the start of his affections towards Clara, and he also wrote music for her. They wrote music for each other, Robert and Johannes Brahms, Robert Schumann, and he helped a lot in Schumann's later years when Schumann attempted suicide and he was in a mental hospital, and Brahms was actually much younger than both of them. He was much younger than Clara, and he was helping Clara with a lot of things. And there's no record of Brahms and Clara ever actually, being romantically involved, but it has fascinated and intrigued and inspired many musicians for many years to come. Almost I was actually talking with someone about this, that the Brahms and Clara thing is so played out, but I actually think it's really beautiful. So yeah, there's it's one of the most famous love triangles, and you have actually written poetry from the perspective of Robert himself writing to Clara, which is so special. That is something that I could have never thought of. So that's really beautiful that you even thought of doing something like that. How did you think of that?
Well, it's very funny that somehow over the past 15 years, amongst the other things that I've been doing with this life of mine, Clara and Robert have been having this conversation in my mind, and every couple years it means that normally he talks to her, and so there's a poem in my first book called Schumann to Clara in Bonn, where he was hospitalized, and as a recent one that came out, and I've just written a new one that I thought I would share, because really you're speaking to so many of these things we're talking about. The idea that in this piece he has written for her fictionally, of course, it's sort of fictionalizes the timeline of their lives, but imagine him writing one last piece for her. And imagine this idea of him trying to express himself in a way through her, so that she truly fathoms both him and herself in a different way.
That's beautiful.
Shall I read it?
Yes, please.
Okay. Schumann to Clara. Love, this is the last song. Play it with all of you, or not at all. I would have liked to say one clear thing before the end of it. I would have liked to say, we stand before our loves in the clothes of our ghosts and vanish into the music of their ruin. I would have liked to sing, we are not what we are. Do it for me, love. What have I learned in this mad life? No one can do it for you. Love, I had another once. She came into my life like fire to show me what myths were finished with me, what ghosts were done with their holding. And I lost her so that I could love the world. The world, the world, the world. Oh, I was a boy once. Be open. Now I hear the wren's nest in the garden, and I know what's closed too is a music. Music is the rolling throat of the common loon, opening in its own good season. I had mine. I had mine. I had mine. Sit there with your perfect hands and your magic. Sit there with that great hush of your love. Come then, this is gladness. I am no one. And when, with my madness, you are open, When that music fells the walls in you that hold you, think of me, my tired heart of wildness, those furious birds that brim me with their singing. Teach me how to lose them. Be with me when my silent hours come.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Wow.
but very much it's, the things you were saying, it's beautiful that what you're saying is very much in this piece, this idea of having really everything we've kind of spoken about in a way, which is why poems always make me feel kind of dumb. Because Mark Strand used to say to me that if your poems aren't smarter than you are, then you're not writing. In the sense that they kind of know and they'll do their magic. But everything we've spoken about, the sense of letting something go, and he had to let something go so that he could have the world. The sense of wanting someone else to do it for you, as it were. And of course, he knows no one can do it for you, right. Which is reciprocally true for her. She can't, he can't do anything for her.
That is the truest iteration of love and intimacy that you just wrote there. That is,
thank you.
That is deep into the core of intimacy. I don't think anyone's tried to explore the emotions of Robert in such a way like that. And for someone who dealt with such strife and struggle in his life, you point to me it seems like you point to the kaleidoscopic elements of struggle, where it's not just, dark, people who struggle still have the capacity to love beautifully and write beautifully and enjoy a beautiful sky beautifully. And
of course. It's like if you don't own that shadow, if you run from that shadow, you're not whole. The great Lithuanian poet Czesław Miłosz says, "What has no shadow has no strength to live." And you can find any number of poets, speaking about this. So we stigmatize those aspects of the self that struggle as though everybody doesn't to some degree. Yeah. But those are the things that forge us. Those are the things that allow us to shake ourselves awake, to be more compassionate to others, to be more compassionate to ourselves. So we can label these things pejoratively and diagnostically, but there they are as gifts. There they are as song.
Yeah. Wow. That was really beautiful.
Thank you. You as well.
Well, I think we have already reached almost an hour, so I want to thank you so much for everything. I've told you this before, but I guess I'll say it publicly that you've made such an influence on me, and it's been such an honor to know you. And
that means a lot to me. That means a lot to me. No, all my students are star students, and you've certainly been one of them. And I think you have a tremendous future with poetry, with music, and I'm very glad that you're doing this series and that people are hearing you and the things that you have to say and the things that you have to make, because it's powerful stuff.
Yeah. Well, thank you to you, and thank you to everyone that tuned in tonight. And this was very beautiful, and we will see I will see the audience next week, and thank you for joining in. Okay.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.